Martin case. Pete Williams is standing by, I believe, with the, do we have Pete there? You are, Pete. What's the latest here?
Well, we're told by a law enforcement official that Georgia prosecutor has decided to pursue criminal charges against George Zimmerman for the shooting of Trayvon Martin, and that it will be announced this afternoon, sometime quite late this afternoon. We don't know what precise form the charges will take. But this comes after the prosecutor had already indicated that she would be making a statement sometime within the next day or so, and we were in that time frame that she originally announced would be the period during which she would make some announcement. Of course, she had a considerable gamut of choices between filing no charges at all or against the charges could take the form, and I don't know what they're going to be, but obviously you have to assume that they would take a form of, it could be as simple as assault. It could be some charge related directly to the killing, manslaughter, negligent homicide. There are a number of choices that the prosecutor has. Now, we know one, of course, the prosecutor doesn't have. Because she's chosen not to use a grand jury, she can't bring first-degree murder charges because under the Florida Constitution, someone can be charged with first-degree murder only if they are first indicted by a grand jury. Now, you know, it's always possible that further down the road, a grand jury could be impaneled and other charges could be pursued. But for now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let us simply say that what we now know, or what we have now been told by law enforcement official, is that the Florida prosecutor will announce today that authorities there are going to pursue some kind of criminal charges against George Zimmerman for the Trayvon Martin case.
Okay, Pete, thank you. Let me bring in Kendall Coffey. Kendall, you were once the top attorney for the state of Florida. We also have with us John Burris. But Kendall, let me start off with you too. Pete's point, we cannot get ahead of ourselves. We do at least know with this grand jury first-degree murder charges off the table as a result of the Florida Constitution. But what do you believe is the likely process ahead or likely charges? And again, I preface this by saying with great concern, I don't want anyone to get ahead of themselves, but we know that he will be charged with something.
Yeah, we're hearing that there are going to be charges brought. I would not expect murder to be charged. It could be the most extreme charge that happens in these kind of scenarios is second-degree murder. But I think if charges are brought, you're more likely looking at manslaughter, which is a second-degree felony in Florida, up to 15 years. And there are also charges including assault and battery with a deadly weapon that would logically be included. Now, keep in mind, there's a very big procedural difference in this kind of case than in others in Florida. And that is that if he's charged and if he then seeks to invoke the immunity of stand your ground, there is actually a judicial determination which could shut down the prosecution entirely based on immunity if a judge were to determine by a preponderance of evidence that George Zimmerman could establish his defense of self-defense under the stand your ground law.
Kendall, what kind of information do you believe was before the special prosecutor here? What do you believe that Angela Corey was looking at? With medical records, we know that some witnesses early on, it said that they were not even spoken to or spoken with by the Sanford police, even though they said they had versions of the story as far as what at least they believe they saw or what they saw in reality here. What do you believe likely was in front of this woman that she was examining?
Well, I think her 3 weeks of it was probably one of the most exhaustive 3 weeks investigation in the history of Florida. And what she really had to be able to focus on is, can she prove that George Zimmerman's account is a lie? Does she have forensic evidence? Are there independent witnesses, 911 tapes that will in fact sufficiently contradict George Zimmerman? So if he's charged and if he takes the stand, which he almost assuredly would have to do in a self-defense case, would she be able to show that whether or not the voice of Trayvon Martin is forever silenced, you should not believe the voice of George Zimmerman?
John Burris, let me bring you in. You took on the Oakland Police Department and won. A lot of the focus rightfully has been on how the Sanford Police Department handled this. The lead investigator said at the time that manslaughter charges should have been pursued. That was not the case. What happened behind the scene is a part of this unfolding story. Nonetheless, you have this special prosecutor now stepping in and going against the 7.5-hour investigation from Sanford Police at the time of this shooting.
Well, I think that the issue around what the police did or did not do will not become relevant significantly in the criminal case. At best, it's really up to the prosecution now to go back, and they probably have. Everything that was supposed to have been done has now been done. And that evidence, whatever it is, will now be used in the criminal case. I do think it's entirely correct that this is a case that they have to disprove Mr. Zimmerman's story, and that's going to be based upon all the stuff that the police did not do at the outset. But what they didn't do is not necessarily evidence of this person's guilt in this particular case. If it was a civil rights case, that might be, but not in this particular case. It's really what did this prosecutor find and what can she use to support her theory. And I do think it's going to be a manslaughter. I don't think it's a murder case up front because the circumstances look like it's a fight, a potential fight, and he used more force than was necessary under the circumstances.
Okay, but John Burris, to that point, you know, if she's looking at the evidence, we know the video that has been examined, it's been enhanced, it's been debated as to whether or not George Zimmerman had a broken nose, and this, what he said was this gash, or his attorneys at the time said this gash in the back of his head. Is it also likely that Angela Corey had to look at the police report, at the medical report? We know that EMT people arrived on the scene, but the information, at least that we've had access to, indicates that they were obviously more concerned with the person who was dead on the ground and not these injuries allegedly sustained by George Zimmerman.
Well, obviously, it's true. They have to look to see what evidence was gathered at the time, whether it was gathered correctly or not, and how it should have been. But she's been able to go back because the EMT people, they had to write a report. There are also reports written by the police. You always have to look at all these particular reports, particularly those in the police, to determine what statements they obtain and whether you can trust those individual statements. That's all part of cross-examination. But from her point of view, what she is looking to see, frankly, this man was the aggressor, and as a consequence of the aggressor, can he then assert a self-defense when he in fact was the aggressor and he's the one that had the gun and the other person did not. So I think that that's how she ultimately sees this case when you evaluate it along with the tapes, the telephone tapes and stuff of that kind that you can get information from.
Kendall Coffey, let me bring you in one last question. We're going to go to a quick break, but what would have been, at least from the information we have, and we do not have everything here, but from your seasoned experience as a prosecutor in that state, what do you believe was the sticking point here to charge George Zimmerman?
Well, I think she's got two things that match up. George Zimmerman's own 9/11 tape basically has established that he was in pursuit of Trayvon Martin. And then you've got from the girlfriend of Trayvon Martin, and there could be a fight as to whether her account of what Trayvon said is admissible or not. But she matches it up in the sense that Trayvon Martin was clearly the person being pursued. And I think when you've got a guy with a gun pursuing a guy who doesn't have a gun, and the guy with a gun kills the other guy, that can add up to a prosecution for manslaughter.
Again, NBC News is confirming that criminal charges will be filed against George Zimmerman 44 days after the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. We will continue our coverage. We're going to go to a quick break. We'll be right here for you with more news.